welcome back. Tonight, I want you to forget the world outside your room. Take a slow breath. Let the darkness settle around you, because this is no ordinary love tale. It's a love that rose higher than the stars, and then shattered a kingdom, tore apart a faith, and left its mark in blood upon a lonely scaffold. If you're ready, close your eyes and follow me into the silence. The night was cold inside the stone walls of Whitehall Palace, yet King Henry VIII burned hotter than any fire roaring in his royal hearth. Power dressed itself upon him like armor, a golden crown atop a mane of red gold hair, emerald eyes glowing like a predator hunting its prey. But tonight, he was not thinking of wars or treaties or the crumbling state of his marriage. No, his thoughts were wrapped tightly around one name, Anne Boleyn. She was unlike any woman he had ever known, sharp where others were soft, bold where others trembled. Anne did not simply bend to the king's desires like all the others before her. She resisted. She kept him chasing, and Henry VIII, a man who conquered nations, found her refusal intoxicating. The court was alive with music and laughter during the Christmas festivities of 1525. Dresses swirled like petals, jewels glimmered beneath candlelight, and noble voices murmured gossip into cups of spiced wine. Henry watched it all from his high seat, but his gaze was fixed on only one place, the far end of the hall, where Anne stood among the ladies-in-waiting of Queen Catherine. Anne's dark eyes scanned the crowd with wit and calculation. Her hair, black as a raven's wing, fell over a gown of deep green velvet. She did not try to look beautiful yet. She looked like temptation itself. Henry rose, his every step a proclamation. The lion had left his throne. The court quieted. Then music swelled again, but every eye followed him. Anne felt the shift in attention before she saw the king approaching. Her heart hammered just once, then steadied behind a mask of indifference. "Lady Anne," Henry said, bowing his head just enough to honor and dominate at the same time. "Would you grant your king a dance?" Anne curtsied, voice smooth as silk. "Your Majesty, I fear I have injured my foot. Dancing would be unwise." A lie, a beautifully crafted lie. Henry smiled not with anger, but with hunger. She had denied him again, and that made his desire roar even louder. "Then I shall wait until you are healed," he said, voice low, "for I will have the honor eventually." Anne's lips curved the slightest bit. Not a smile, but something far more dangerous. "We shall see," she replied. Henry felt the challenge vibrate in his bones. Across the hall, Queen Catherine watched, silent, regal, and weary. She had given Henry a daughter, Princess Mary, but no male heir. Years of miscarriages and stillbirths had turned their once loving marriage into something colder than winter. She saw her husband, as obsession growing its target, uncomfortably close at court end. A tremor of dread shivered through her aging heart. But Catherine was a queen. She would not show fear. The weeks that followed were a dance without dancing. Henry sent Anne jewels. She returned them. He wrote poems. Anne returned his letters unopened. He offered private audiences. She arrived only with company. She intrigued him. She angered him. She consumed him. One night, Henry cornered an inner gallery lined with portraits of long-dead monarchs. The torches cast shadows high on the walls, like spirits watching the future unfold. "You reject my every kindness," Henry said. "Do you not understand who I am?" Anne stepped closer, not submissive, but bold. "Oh, I understand perfectly. You are the king. Any woman would be flattered by your attention." Henry leaned in, breath warm against her cheek. "And yet you resist." "Because I am not any woman," Anne answered. "I will not be your mistress." The king stiffened. All his prior lovers had granted him what he wanted. Anne was rewriting the rules. "If you wish for me," she whispered, "you must make me your queen." The words struck like lightning. Queen, a forbidden word, a treasonous word, a word that could ignite a war. Henry felt his pulse thunder. "You would ask me to cast aside my lawful wife, a daughter of Spain, a princess of the most powerful empire in Christendom." Anne did not blink. "I ask nothing, but I will not share a bed with a man who already shares his throne." Henry's breath caught. It was the bravest or foolishest thing he had ever heard, but he wanted her even more. That night he returned to his room, shaking with desire, with fury, with a fire he could not extinguish. He took quill to parchment, pouring ink like blood spilled for love. "I cannot live without you. I am yours, body and soul." Anne read his words in secret, with a thrill she barely allowed herself to feel. For though she played hard, her own heart was not immune. His passion, his power, his promise she could taste the crown he dangled before her. Yet beneath her ambition lurked something darker. If she climbed high on love, she could fall just as far. At court, tongues wagged like snakes. Nobles whispered behind jeweled fans. "The king has lost his mind. Anne will destroy us all." The queen still has powerful allies, and they were right to fear. Catherine's nephew was Emperor Charles V, ruler of half the world. To set her aside would be to provoke a giant. Henry wrestled with sleepless nights. The question tormented him. Why would God deny him a son? He came to believe Catherine was cursed married to his brother Arthur first, then to him. The Bible warned against such unions, and Henry, desperate for justification, convinced himself heaven demanded change. He summoned the greatest minds of England, clergy, scholars, lawyers all, to find him a path to be free. But Catherine would not surrender her crown, nor would the Pope bless a divorce that shamed her family. Henry raged. He needed Anne by his side. He needed a son, and the church dared say no to a king. His obsession darkened into vengeance. He would tear down anything that stood between him and Anne Boleyn, the Holy Church itself. Anne, meanwhile, played her hand carefully. She smiled when needed, refused when needed, and kept rising in favor, her enemies multiplying in shadows. Among the most watchful was a man named Thomas Cromwell, who studied Henry's passion with cold calculation. He saw power-shifting monarchy, stretching claws toward absolute rule. Cromwell, clever as a serpent, intended to rise with it. Then there was Cardinal Wolsey, once Henry's most trusted adviser, now trembling as he failed again and again to secure the annulment. Each failure was another crack in his influence, and Anne hammered those cracks wider. Whispers spread. Anne is bewitching the king. She has him under a spell. This love will doom us all. And beneath the whispers, a truth was forming. This was not love anymore. This was hunger with teeth. One candlelit evening, Henry and Anne found themselves alone, truly alone, for the first time in months. Guards dismissed, doors locked, silence thick as fate. Henry took Anne's hand, pulling her close. "All of England may rise against us, but still I want you. Tell me, do you not want me to?" Anne's resolve wavered. Her heart slammed like a trapped bird. Inside her mind, two voices clashed. "You love him. You must control him. "Words are wind, your majesty," she said softly. "Prove I am not just a passing desire." "How?" Henry demanded. Anne pressed her palm against his cheek. "Make me queen. Make our children heirs to England." They're spoken boldly. Henry stared at Hereford a long moment. He said nothing. Then he laughed, not with humor, but with victory. "You will have the crown," he vowed. "I will tear the world apart for you." Anne swallowed hard. She had won. And yet, something cold slithered up her spine. For when a king promises the world, he may destroy the world to keep that promise. Months passed. Alliances shifted like sand. England trembled on the edge of transformation. Henry declared himself head of the church, ruler of souls, as well as bodies. Monasteries fell. Clergy bowed. Power moved like a storm front, and behind it walked Anne Boleyn. At last, Catherine was cast aside, banished from court, stripped of her title. But she did not bend. She called herself queen until her dying breath, fighting silently against the woman who had replaced her. The people of England mourned their beloved Catherine, and hated the woman who had stolen the king's heart. Stones were thrown at Anne's carriage in the streets. Her name was spat like poison. But Henry saw only triumph. On a winter night, heavy with mist, he led Anne to a secret chapel. Their marriage ceremony was swift, almost desperate. No crowds, no celebration. Only a few witnesses to history shifting beneath their feet. Anne was now his wife. Soon she would be crowned. Her victory tasted like honey and blood. Henry kissed her deeply, whispering against her lips, "We are unstoppable." But outside the chapel, thunder rolled, dark clouds gathering for a future not even a king could command. Hours later, alone in her chamber, Anne pressed her hand against her stomach. A child grew within her, a living promise, a future king. Joy struck her like lightning bright, terrifying. Everything she had risked, every enemy she had made, now it would all be worth it. She imagined a crown on a tiny head. She imagined a son who would secure her throne forever. She imagined Henry kneeling before her, grateful. She imagined the world finally bowing to Anne Boleyn. But as the candlelight flickered, shadows crawled across the walls, shadows shaped like crowns, tumbling like swords, falling like heads without bodies. Her heart stuttered because she knew a terrible truth. If she did not give Henry a son, everything she had gained could be taken away. Love that raised her high could drop her from a deadly height. Still, she whispered into the darkness, "He will be a boy. He must be a boy." Yet fate, listening with cruel delight, already knew the end of that prayer. And fate was waiting, waiting to strike, waiting to begin the fall. As Anne closed her eyes, believing the world finally belonged to her, faraway Queen Catherine prayed a desperate prayer. May God protect the innocent and punish the wicked. That night, both women dreamed of crowns. Only one would wake to wear it, and one would one day wake to die beneath it. And fate was waiting, waiting to strike, waiting to begin the fall. Anne Boleyn stood on the balcony of Greenwich Palace, one hand wrapped protectively around her belly, the icy wind of February stinging her cheeks. Below, the Thames rolled with dark waves, swollen with winter rain. The moon's reflection stretched across the water like a blade. Behind her, the door opened. Henry stepped into the night, his cloak whipping behind him. His eyes found her instantly, the woman for whom he had broken a kingdom. "A son," Henry murmured as he came to her side, the word trembling with longing. "Our son will bring peace to every corner of England." Anne turned to him, her confidence a mask hiding the fear coiled deep within her ribs. He will be strong. He will rule long after we are gone. Henry cupped her face, his thumb brushing her lips. And you, my queen, will be celebrated until the end of time. Queen. He called her queen now, without hesitation. But outside the palace. Outside, she was still the usurper. Anne leaned into his touch, yet there was a tremor in her breath. She could feel the weight of that word, queen, like iron pressing her shoulders. The higher she climbed, the more brutal the drop. Henry kissed her, a kiss full of possession and prophecy. But when he pulled away, his smile faltered. "What is it?" Anne asked. Henry stared across the river, jaw tight. "The people still spit Catherine's name like a prayer, and yours like a curse." Anne's gaze hardened. "I am your wife. I carry the future king." "And yet," Henry hissed, "they refuse to see God's will. But they will learn. They will bow." His hand slid to her stomach. "And this child will force them to." Lightning flashed behind Anne's eyes. Pride, fear, ambition, and desperation all entangled. "But if," Henry's voice dimmed, "if this babe is not a boy," Anne seized his hand. "Do not finish that sentence." Henry looked at her, truly looked, and for a flicker of a moment, she saw doubt swimming beneath the king's certainty. It chilled her blood, because kings who doubt destroy. Months passed like an hourglass, draining too quickly. Henry pushed England deeper into rebellion against Rome, and deeper into loyalty to Anne. Churches were stripped, priests silenced, those who defended Catherine imprisoned. The country bled spiritually, and Anne's name was painted on every wound. Enemies multiplied, like wolves sensing weakness. Among them, Thomas More, the incorruptible conscience of England. The people in the streets, who prayed for Catherine and cursed Anne, and even those in Anne's own household, smiling as they sharpened daggers behind her back. But none hated Anne more than Spain, for Catherine's nephew, Emperor Charles V, had sworn no mercy. Anne knew it. Every letter from abroad reminded her, every whisper warned her. She was surrounded. The day of Anne's coronation arrived, beneath a sky heavy with clouds. The procession traveled from the Tower of London to Westminster Abbey, streets flooded with watchers, too many silent, too many glowering. Anne sat tall upon a throne carried by sweating men, her body lined with gold, her hair crowned in gems and defiance. She searched the crowds for smiles, for cheers. Instead, she found clenched jaws, crossed arms, eyes full of judgment. One old woman spat at the ground as Anne passed. Another made the sign of the cross, whispering Catherine's name. Anne's heartbeat thudded painfully. Do they not see? I won. Her jaw lifted higher, and I will continue to win. Henry, walking ahead, threw sharp looks at the crowd, a king furious that his will was not adored. Only when Anne entered the abbey did the darkness lift. Choir voices rose, like angels forced to praise her. Trumpets sounded. Incense filled the air with holy smoke. The archbishop set the crown upon her head, the same crown worn by queens before her, forged from centuries of loyalty. But the metal burned, because Anne knew it was not her head the people saw beneath that crown. It was Catherine's ghost. Still, she rose to her feet, triumphant, Queen Anne at last. As summer unfurled, Anne's belly grew, and Henry's anticipation grew wilder, sharper, darker. Every night, his hand rested there. Every morning, his first question was the same. How is my son today? And Anne smiled, always smiled, even when anxiety twisted inside her bones like fire. She could not show fear. Fear was fatal. Finally, September arrived. The midwives rushed through the palace like storm winds. The queen screamed in agony behind velvet curtains, nails clawing at linen sheets. Hours stretched into a torment that felt like eternity. Henry paced outside, his boots carving a trench into the floor. Courtiers avoided his eyes. No one dared speak. At last, a cry. A new voice entered the world. A new destiny took breath. The midwife stepped forward, trembling under the weight of history. Henry seized her shoulders. A son. Silence. The woman's eyes dropped. A daughter, Your Majesty. Time froze. Henry's fingers loosened their grip. He stepped back as though struck across the face. A daughter. Another princess. Another failure. The midwife hurried to correct herself, voice cracking. But she is perfect, healthy, strong, prettier than summer dawn. Henry's anger erupted like cannon fire. I asked for a son. God promised me a son. He stormed from the chamber, leaving everyone trembling in his wake. Inside, Anne lay drenched in sweat and hope dying in her chest. She reached for the tiny bundle, crying beside her. The infant's skin was soft as silk, her little fists curled with promise. Anne stared into her daughter's newborn face, dark eyes blinking at the world. What name shall we give her? A maid whispered. Anne swallowed. Her throat ached. Elizabeth, she whispered. Her name is Elizabeth. No one celebrated. No trumpets, no cheers, no feast for the kingdom that night. A princess had been born, but a queen's future had begun to rot. Days crawled forward, heavy, silent, cruel. Henry visited seldom, and when he did, his smile was tight as a blade. She will be queen one day, Anne insisted, holding Elizabeth close. Henry forced a chuckle. If God wills it. But his eyes said something else. If you give me a son, we will not need her. Anne's heart, once soaring with victory, now trembled like a bird fearing the hawk overhead. Her triumph was already slipping through her fingers, and then fate struck again. Anne conceived once more. Relief flooded her like sunlight breaking stone. This time, she told herself, this time the child would be a boy. Henry returned to her bed with renewed devotion. He kissed her hands like they were sacred, but Anne noticed how his gaze still wandered, how it lingered too long on the soft smiles of her ladies. His loyalty was thin as glass, and love that thin can cut deep. Winter sharpened its claws over England when a new shadow crept into the palace. Her name, Jane Seymour. Unlike Anne, Jane was quiet, modest, gentle as fresh snow. Her eyes lowered whenever the king entered the room, or so she pretended. Henry noticed, and Anne noticed him noticing. One afternoon, Anne caught them alone, Henry leaning too close, Jane blushing too sweetly. Anne hissed, "Leave us." Jane curtsied, retreating with the silence of a snake sliding into grass. Henry raised a brow. "Why such jealousy, my love?" "Because I know how far a king's desire will go," Anne snapped. Henry's voice cooled to ice. "Careful, I have torn down a kingdom for you. I could just as easily tear down you." The threat pulsed like poison. Their love, once fire, now smoldered with smoke and danger. Anne's second pregnancy pushed her forward with desperate hope. Every prayer she whispered became a bargain with God. A son and Henry will love me again. A son and the crown will stay mine. A son and I will be safe. But anxiety gnawed her constant, especially as Henry drifted closer to Jane Seymour, sweetness turning seduction beneath lace cuffs. The court watched like vultures. If Anne fell, they would feast. Then disaster. On a bitter day in late January, Anne stood in a hall, watching Henry flirt openly with Jane. Rage cracked through her like lightning. She lunged forward, trying to snatch a letter he had hidden proof of treachery. He shoved her back. Anne stumbled. A gasp tore from her throat. Then her knees buckled. Blood spread beneath her like a terrible blooming flower. The world went silent. Henry stared, horror widening his eyes. Anne's hands clutched her belly, tears streaking her cheeks. Please, please, no. Servants rushed to her, screams echoing through the palace. Hours later, another child was dead, and this time it had been a boy. The heir Henry had begged God for, the miracle Anne had clung to, gone. Something inside Henry cracked. Something inside Anne shattered. Henry stood at the foot of the bed, voice low and venomous. "This loss is your fault," he said. "Your fault alone," Anne sobbed, reaching out. "Henry, please." He turned his back, and the door slammed shut. She was no longer the woman he had fought an empire to love. She was the obstacle he needed to remove. And obstacles in a king's path do not remain for long. After the miscarriage, Anne's chamber turned into a prison of whispered fears. Her ladies watched with pity or triumph. It was hard to tell which. Elizabeth was kept away more often, as though the tiny princess reminded everyone of an failure. Anne stared each day at the cradle that should have held a prince. The empty silk bedding mocked her. Her nightmares came alive. Henry holding a son, but the mother's face was wrong. Jane Seymour, smiling sweetly in Anne's crown. No, she would not allow it. Her grip on the throne tightened like a grasp on the edge of a cliff. Henry spent more and more time away, hunting, drinking, laughing with companions who once trembled at Anne's name. They no longer feared her. They smelled blood. One evening, he returned with a wide grin and flushed cheeks, smelling of wine and new desire. "I have been with Jane today," he said bluntly, as if daring her to protest. Anne rose from her chair so quickly the room spun. "How dare you flaunt her in my face?" Henry shrugged. "You have failed me. Perhaps God never wished you to be my wife." Cold panic crawled through Anne's veins. "You promised me the world, and you promised me sons," Henry spat back. "Where are they?" Anne's nails dug into her palms. "We will try again." Henry cut her off with a slow, merciless smile. "Perhaps it is not I who should try again, but another." The meaning was a dagger. He left before she could speak. Anne collapsed to the floor, breath shattering in her chest. She felt it, the ground crumbling beneath her feet. Everything she had fought for, slipping into a void she could not claw her way out of. Outside her window, the wind howled like a warning. In council chambers, whispers turned into plans. Thomas Cromwell watched the king's frustrations deepen, sharpen, turn poisonous. Cromwell had once served Cardinal Wolsey, whom Anne helped destroy. He had not forgotten, nor forgiven. He had climbed higher under an S-rise, but he now saw a future with her ruined, and Cromwell was nothing if not adaptable. "We must protect the king's legacy," he murmured. Two men who already hated Anne. "We must free him from his mistake." They drafted rumors like death warrants. Anne was faithless. Anne flirted. Anne bewitched noblemen with her eyes. Anne would never stop until the king was destroyed. Lies, but deadly ones. The court began to look at Anne the way a wolf pack looked at a wounded leader, with hunger. Spring arrived too early that year, a brightness that felt wrong. Anne tried to reclaim power, smiling at Henry, kneeling with Elizabeth in her arms, promising the future still belonged to them. But Henry's attention drifted like a ship seeking a different shore. His gaze followed Jane Seymour, whose virtue was paraded like a flag. At night, Anne sobbed silently into her pillow, so no one would hear the Queen break. One day, Henry returned from hunting and announced a dangerous decision. "I will send Elizabeth away from court," he declared. Anne froze. "No." Henry's eyes narrowed. "Do you forget who commands here? She is our daughter. She must stay close." "She is a disappointment," Henry snarled. "A girl cannot secure my throne." Anne's voice cracked. "She is still my child." Henry leaned close, breath warm with threat. "Do not test me, Anne. You are out of favor. Pray, you do not fall further." Those words slammed into her like a hammer striking glass. That night, Anne stood in her chamber long after everyone slept. She stared at her reflection, pale, haunted, desperate. Every victory she once celebrated now felt like a curse. She had wanted power, but power had teeth, and now it was biting back. She whispered to the silence, "I will not fall. I will not break." Outside, a raven perched on the stone ledge, feathers slick as ink, eyes glittering with omen. It tapped on the window. Once, twice, a sign. Anne shivered. In the shadows of the palace, Cromwell moved like night incarnate. He fed Henry's doubts carefully, drop by poisonous drop. "Your Majesty deserves loyalty," he said, "and yet, look how the Queen treats you." Henry clenched his jaw. "She resents me. She embarrasses you," Cromwell whispered, "and England sees it." Henry's eyes darkened, and worse. Cromwell lowered his voice as if afraid of his own words. "She might even betray you." Henry inhaled sharply. Betray? With who? Cromwell listed names like he was reading a death sentence. Sir Henry Norris, the king's closest friend; Francis Weston, a young noble, too charming for his own safety; Mark Smeaton, the musician who adored Anne. "Men linger too near her," Cromwell warned. "They speak softly, they smile too eagerly." Henry's heart twisted, not with love, but with wounded pride and rage. The idea of Anne choosing another, even in rumor, ignited something monstrous. "If she is guilty," Henry whispered, "I will kill her with my own hands." Cromwell bowed. "It shall be done, Your Majesty." Meanwhile, Anne believed she still had time. One night, she walked with Elizabeth in the palace gardens, the toddler gripping her fingers with tiny hands. Anne knelt, pressing a gentle kiss to her daughter's forehead. "You will be great," she murmured. "Greater than they will ever imagine." Branches rustled, a figure watching from the shadows. Jane Seymour. She stepped forward, just enough for Anne to see the smirk she tried to hide. Anne's spine straightened, fire returning to her eyes. "So," she hissed, "you come to look at what will never be yours." Jane curtsied, the picture of innocence. "I only do what His Majesty commands." "You are a fool if you think Henry's love will protect you," Anne said. "When you fail him, he will cast you aside too." Jane's smile was slight, but deadly, perhaps. "But first, he plans to cast you aside." Anne's heart lurched. Jane leaned closer, voice barely a whisper. "And I will wear your crown." The world spun. Jane walked away, leaving Anne trembling, clutching her daughter tighter than ever. Inside the palace walls, fate sharpened its blade. Anne Boleyn was no longer a queen rising. She was a queen marked. The trap tightened around her with silent precision, spun by a king poisoned by disappointment, and a minister hungry for her ruin, and a rival who smiled like a saint and killed like a serpent. Anne did not yet know the hour, but the axe was already being sharpened, and somewhere deep in the Tower of London, a raven perched above the scaffold, waiting for the day it would feast. April arrived with sunshine that felt mocking. It was the month everything began to die. Anne woke to a strange sensation. The palace air was different, tense, listening, as if walls themselves held secrets. Her mornings were colder now. Fewer ladies attended her. Henry barely looked at her. Every shift in the wind felt like danger approaching. She knew something was coming, but not when, not how. Uncertainty gnawed her nerves to threads. The first blow came swiftly. Mark Smeaton, the talented musician who adored Anne from afar, was dragged into interrogation by Cromwell's men. They shut him away in darkness. Torture followed, fingers crushed, skin burned, until his screams echoed through the tower stones. He confessed to lies to make the pain stop. He said he had been Anne's lover. He said she had betrayed the king. A signature was forced from his bleeding hand, and with that single forged confession, the trap slammed shut. The next morning, Anne noticed it. The guards at her door, the coldness in their eyes, the way whispers died when she entered the room. Is something wrong? And asked her ladies. No one answered. Fear was thick enough to choke on. Cromwell moved with terrifying speed. Sir Henry Norris, the king's beloved friend, arrested. Francis Weston, Catherine's defender, arrested. George Boleyn, Anne's own brother, arrested, accused of treason, accused of adultery with the Queen. Anne's blood ran cold. They were not just building a case, they were building a story, a monstrous story that ended with her death. Henry did not speak to her, not a single word. The man who once swore he would tear down the world for her now would not even meet her eyes, but understood his silence was her sentence. May Day, the tournament that was once her favorite celebration, arrived like a mask covering something rotten underneath. Anne stood beside the king as knights paraded below. Music soared, lances clashed, crowds cheered, but Henry's shoulders were stiff, his expression carved from stone. Sir Henry Norris rode into the arena, armor gleaming. He saluted the king, then the queen, though his hand shook just slightly. Anne smiled back, a reflex, a memory of better days. Moments later, during a tilt, Norris stumbled, only for Henry to abruptly rise. Stop the tournament, he ordered, voice like thunder. The entire crowd froze, confused, silent. Henry stormed out of the stands. Guards seized Norris instantly. Anne's heart plummeted as she watched her friend dragged away, frightened, calling out his innocence. Then Henry looked back. One glance, cold, unrecognizing, dead. Anne felt something in her chest crack. Her crown suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. That night, the palace fell into a terrifying quiet. Anne waited for Henry, waited for answers, waited for hope. None came. Instead, armored footsteps echoed down the corridor. The door burst open. The constable of the tower entered, bowing stiffly. "Your Majesty," he said, "I must escort you to the Tower of London." Anne laughed, a brittle, broken sound. There must be a mistake. But the guards' hands tightened on their weapons. "No mistake," the constable replied. "By order of the king." The words ripped through her like steel. They led her away, through halls she once ruled like a goddess, through corridors where she once walked with her chin high. Now her hands shook uncontrollably. People watched her pass, some with pity, some with satisfaction, some with fear of being seen watching. Anne lifted her chin, forcing regal composure, her last shield. If she was to fall, she would fall like a queen. The tower loomed ahead, ancient and merciless. Ravens circled above like spirits, hungry for tragedy. As they crossed the threshold, Anne stumbled. Her knees hit the stone. Tears burst from her eyes. "I am innocent," she whispered. Then louder, voice ragged, "I am innocent." The guards remained silent. They had heard such declarations before, from the damned. She was taken not to a dungeon, but to the royal lodging where queens once prepared for coronations. A cruel mockery. It was here she had once waited to rise. Now she waited to be destroyed. News spread through London like a plague. "The Queen is arrested. She betrayed the king. She is a witch. She seduced men. She killed her own children in the womb." Lies, each more venomous than the last. The same people who threw stones at her carriage now cheered for her downfall. Crowds gathered outside the tower, chanting, jeering, celebrating as if it were a holiday. The woman they had hated was finally defeated, or so they believed. Inside the walls, Anne stood alone, terrified, trembling, but unbroken. Not yet. Henry celebrated that night, drank until he stumbled. Jane Seymour sat nearby, like a pale ghost of virtue, pretending shyness, while victory glittered in her eyes. Henry whispered to her, "Soon you will have a crown." Jane bowed her head modestly, but a smile touched her lips. Their feast was louder than Anne's sobs, echoing through the tower. Anne was questioned repeatedly, accusations thrown like daggers. "You committed adultery." "No." "You plotted to kill the king." "Never." "You lay with your own brother." "How dare you?" she protested, until her throat burned, tears carving rivers across her cheeks. But the men questioning her did not want truth. They wanted a confession. They wanted blood. The more she denied them, the deeper they sharpened the blade. One night, alone in her chamber, Anne knelt on the cold floor, fingers twisted in prayer, not for herself, for Elizabeth. Because children of fallen queens rarely lived long. Her voice shook as she whispered, "God, protect her. Let her live. Even if I do not." Her tears fell like pearls, one by one. She had fought for power. Now she fought only for her daughter's life. The trial was announced, a spectacle the whole world would watch. But Anne knew the verdict already. The king had decided. Her fate was sealed the moment their unborn son died. Henry once declared he would die for Anne Boleyn. Now he would watch her die instead. As the sun set behind the tower and Anne curled beneath a thin blanket, a raven landed on her window ledge. Its black feathers ruffled. Its eyes glowed with hunger. Its beak tapped once against the glass. A promise, a countdown. Anne stared back with hollow eyes, unblinking, unafraid. If death was coming for her, she would look it in the face, and she would not bow. If death was coming for her, she would look it in the face. But Anne had not yet understood the true horror of power. Kings do not kill alone. They build a stage and gather an audience to applaud the execution. The morning light that crept into her tower chamber felt icy and gray. Anne dressed herself with trembling hands, forcing dignity onto a trembling body. Her hair was pinned cleanly, her gown simple, a queen stripped of jewels, but not of pride. She would face her accusers as a Boleyn, as a Tudor queen, even if they called her a monster. The trial took place in the great hall of the tower, a room designed for ceremony, now defiled by corruption. Over 2,000 spectators crammed into the gallery, all eager for blood. When Anne entered, a wave of silence fell. Every eye locked upon her, some filled with hatred, some with fascination, a rare few with regret. She walked forward with her back straight, refusing to let her legs show their weakness. Each step echoed like a heartbeat. Her heartbeat. Boom, boom, boom. The sound of a life approaching its end. On the throne sat her judges, men who once bowed at her feet, men who once begged for her approval, men who now held her life in their hands. Among them, her uncle, the Duke of Norfolk. His eyes were cold, void of family, loyalty, or humanity. He would rather survive than save his own blood. And seated with haunting serenity, Jane Seymour, not as a participant, not yet, but as the future. Anne felt her stomach twist, but she did not look away. The charges were read aloud, each one a dagger. Adultery with Mark Smeaton, adultery with Henry Norris, adultery with Francis Weston, adultery with William Brereton, incest with her brother, George Boleyn, conspiring to murder the king. She let the words wash over her filth, lies, poison, crafted from fear and ambition. When silence followed, all eyes waited for her collapse. Instead, Anne lifted her chin and spoke, voice clear as bell metal. I have been a faithful wife to the king, a loyal queen to England, and any man who claims otherwise lies. Her voice carried, unwavering. I would rather die 1,000 deaths than ever betray his majesty or my God. A murmur swept the hall, not fear, not awe, surprise. This was not a witch, not a serpent, but a woman wounded, yet unyielding. Witnesses stepped forward, one by one, spewing rehearsed accusations. She bewitched the king. She laughed about the queen's death. She spoke treason in secret. She seduced me with her eyes. She made me her slave of lust. Men said these things with shaking hands because they knew what would happen if they defied Cromwell. Truth had no place in this hall. Survival did. Then George Boleyn was brought in, and saw him, bruised, exhausted, but still carrying the arrogance of a nobleman who knew he was better than those destroying him. Their eyes met, brother and sister, innocence reflected, devotion unspoken. George smiled, hopeless but brave. He refused to crumble. He refused to give them a show. When asked whether he had committed incest with his sister, he laughed, not hysterically, but with disbelief in the sheer absurdity of their lies. That laugh became his death sentence. The verdicts came quickly. George Boleyn, guilty. The accused men, guilty. Anne Boleyn, guilty. The hall exploded with cheers. Anne stood frozen, the breath knocked from her lungs as if a knife had sliced open her chest. Guilty. The word tasted like iron and ash. She clenched her fists so tightly her nails cut into her palms. But still, she held her head high. If they wanted a broken queen, they would be disappointed. Henry was informed of the verdict. He did not cry. He did not rage. He did not mourn the woman he once worshipped. He simply nodded. It is done. Then he signed the death warrants as casually as one signs a letter, sealing the fate of 6 lives. And afterward, he went to Jane. He promised her marriage. He promised her sons. He promised her the crown still warm with another woman's blood. Jane, hiding triumph behind a mask of innocence, whispered, I only pray your Majesty's happiness returns. But deep inside, she knew his happiness required Anne's destruction. The executions of the men came first. Crowds gathered once more outside Tower Hill, hungry to see traitors fall. The chopping block gleamed with splinters and stains. The air reeked of anticipation. Mark Smeaton went first, terrified, shaking, tears streaming. He died young and broken. Francis Weston followed proudly, praying for mercy. Brereton, silent. Henry Norris, once the king's closest friend, whispered with his final breath, "God forgive him, for he knows not what he does." George Boleyn stood tall, defiant, until the blade slammed down. His head rolled. His eyes remained open, as if still searching for his sister. Anne heard the distant cheers from her chamber, her hand pressed to her heart as though trying to hold it together. Her brother was gone. Part of her soul died with him. That night, Anne was visited, not by Henry, not by family, but by the Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, the very man who had helped crown her queen. He arrived with papers, a new sin, divorce. Cranmer claimed her marriage had been invalid from the start, tainted by witchcraft and betrayal, meaning Elizabeth, her precious little girl, would be declared a bastard. Anne collapsed. "Please," she begged, "do not take her future from her. Take my life, but do not destroy hers." Her tears glistened on the stone floor. Cranmer looked away. He left with the king's victory in his hands. The night before her execution, Anne slept very little. She sang softly, voice delicate as dying light, lullabies she once sang to Elizabeth. Her ladies wept quietly nearby. Anne wiped their tears. "Do not cry," she whispered. "I have hope, because God does not abandon the innocent." Yet when she was alone, when the darkness pressed close, she wrapped her arms around herself and trembled. She feared the blade. She feared the end. She feared the silence that came after. But most of all, she feared being forgotten. Dawn approached, slow and merciless. The constable returned. "It is time." Anne nodded once, a queen's acceptance. She walked toward the scaffold, each step a farewell to life. The courtyard was filled with spectators once more, breath steaming in the morning chill. The scaffold loomed wooden, slick with the memory of death. Anne looked at the axe, and her heart stopped. There was no axe. Instead, a tall, masked swordsman waited. An executioner from Calais, brought specially to ensure a quick, clean death. Henry's one final gesture of mercy. Cruel mercy. Hollow mercy. Too little, too late. Anne climbed the steps. Wind tangled her hair. Her gown rippled like a banner of defeat. She turned to face her audience. Thousands gathered to witness the end of the most hated woman in England. Her voice rang out strong, unwavering. "I pray for the king. He has been ever a good and gracious lord, and I go to my death with a humble heart." She would not give them the satisfaction of bitterness. She would not let history call her vengeful. She was still a queen until her last breath. Blindfolded, she knelt. Her fingers brushed the rough wood beneath her. Her lips moved silently in prayer. The executioner approached, slowly, stealthily. He raised the sword, steel gleaming like winter sunlight, and inhaled one final breath, and then a loud noise behind her. A shout, a distraction. Instinctively, she turned her head. The sword flashed down, a perfect, terrible arc, sharp enough to cut air darkness. But death was not silence, it was memory. Even as Anne's body fell still, her story did not. It spread through whispers, through fear, through the beating hearts of those left behind. A queen was gone, but a legacy had been born. Henry received the news of her death while out hunting, smiling, triumphant. He lifted his head to the sky and breathed deeply, as if relieved of a curse. By sunset, he was already dressed in bright colors again. By morning, he announced his engagement to Jane Seymour. 11 days later, they were married. History moved swiftly, crushing the past beneath ceremony and celebration. But Anne was not forgotten, not by those who had loved her, not by the child she left behind, not by England's soil itself, and certainly not by God. Princess Elizabeth, just 2 years old, did not understand why her mother no longer tucked her into bed. She walked the corridors of her new household, seeking the queen everyone refused to name. Sometimes she would cry at night, calling out, "Mama." No one answered. But if the wind passed through the window at the right moment, gently brushing her hair, it felt like love. Anne's love. The kind that refuses to die. Henry's new reign with Jane brought hope. For a moment, she promised him the one thing Anne could not give him again, a son. Henry's obsession returned, fevered and frantic. His entire kingdom waited with him, breathless, praying for a male heir. Jane succeeded. Edward was born. Henry finally held the child he had destroyed a queen to create. He wept tears of joy. He celebrated. He felt complete. Then, days later, Jane Seymour died. Blood loss stole her breath, and Henry's happiness crumbled like ash in his hands. He wept again, but now those tears were for himself, because every throne he built was laid on top of a grave. Henry remarried again and again and again. 6 wives, 6 stories, 6 different kinds of heartbreak. Yet none haunted him like hers. Anne Boleyn had loved him with a fire fierce enough to burn the world down. He had loved her too, once with equal spark, but love turned to fear, fear turned to resentment, resentment turned to execution and nightmares. Henry began to see her in mirrors, in empty rooms, in the corners of his vision. Her voice whispering through his sleepless nights, "You promised forever." His hair grayed faster. His body rotted from disease. His heart turned to stone. He was a king surrounded by power and devoured by ghosts, especially hers. Elizabeth grew clever, cautious, sharpened like her mother. She learned to smile for enemies and hide her wounds beneath elegance. She studied quietly, watched everyone, trusted no one. The Tudors were a family that devoured its own. But Elizabeth's fire was inherited. Anne's blood, defiant, unstoppable, pulsed through her veins. One day, she whispered to her own reflection, "I was born to be more." A spark of destiny ignited. Years passed. Edward reigned briefly and died young. Mary took the throne and ruled with fear, a storm fueled by vengeance. Elizabeth survived both rulers, dodging lies, prisons, death sentences, wearing composure like armor, until, at last, the crown found its rightful head. Elizabeth Tudor, daughter of the executed queen, was crowned Queen of England. The crowds roared louder than they ever had for Henry. They chanted her name with wild devotion. They swore loyalty to a queen unlike any other. Elizabeth looked out over her kingdom, her mother's kingdom, and breathed in the future. She ruled not through marriage, but through mind and iron resolve. No husband would determine her fate. No king would possess her. She became the ruler England needed, the one Anne dreamed of being, the one Anne died to create. But Elizabeth never forgot the price. She kept a portrait of Anne hidden in her private chambers, the world never allowed to see the mother England killed. Sometimes, before bed, Elizabeth would touch the frame gently and whisper, "I remember." And somewhere, in those moonlit hours, Anne Boleyn's spirit smiled, because her name, once drowned in scandal and lies, now echoed in every church bell, every victory, every heartbeat of Elizabeth's reign. Her execution had not ended her story. It had immortalized it. Henry died, sick, bitter, unloved, in a silent room, heavy with regret. They placed his body in a tomb next to Jane Seymour, his true wife, as he had claimed. But fate is cruel with liars. For a while Jane rested beside him. It was Anne's daughter who inherited the world. Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, the Lioness of England, a monarch who shaped history with fire and brilliance, a queen who became legend, a woman who changed the world. Her mother's sacrifice had not been in vain, because, in the end, Anne Boleyn did not lose. Henry VIII did. He won the crown, but she won eternity. She lived forever in the heart of a daughter who made England magnificent, and that is the truest revenge any woman could claim. When ravens circle the tower, some say it is her, watching, waiting, a silent reminder that power comes with a price, a whisper of wings, a flicker of black feathers, a shiver in the winter wind. Anne Boleyn, the queen who would not bow, the queen they thought they could erase, the queen who still walks the walls of the tower at night, not a ghost of sorrow, a ghost of triumph.